Hey guys, Viking Guitar here. Today we're going to talk about some very basic music theory. We're going to go over your basic scales and modes, and specifically how they pertain to guitar and how they relate to each other. There are 7 of them in all. We're going to go over diagrams for all of them. The diagrams are also going to be included as a link below this video so you can click and have reference. So without further waiting, let's dive into it. A scale is a collection of notes that complete an octave. For example, if you're starting at the note A, you're going to refer to a scale to know all the notes that you can play between that A and either the next A or the one before it, depending on whether you're going up and down. Today, the scale we're going to be looking at is the major scale, and the 7 modes that are derived from that scale. And those modes are Ionian, which is the first one, Dorian, which is the second, Phrygian, which is the third, Lydian, which is the fourth, Mixolydian, which is the 5th, aeolian, which is the 6th, and Locrian, which is the 7th. Now, I don't expect you to memorize all these right now, but we're going to go into each one in detail and highlight some of the differences between each and talk about how they're all derived from the major scale. Alright, so first let's talk about what makes up a scale. A scale starts with a root note. For all the examples in this video, that root note is going to be the note A. Now, what's going to differentiate between all the different scales are the notes you're going to hit between that A and the next A and the next A. Obviously, there's a whole lot of notes in between there, and depending on which ones you land on, it's going to give the whole thing a different sound and a different feel. We're going to start with the Ionian mode. This is the first mode of the major scale, and usually when people say that they're playing in a major scale or a song's in A major or C major or something, they're referring to the Ionian scale. I'm not going to show you every little note and explain it. I'm just going to play it through a few times slow. If you want to look at the specific frettings, just watch my hand, and also down below this video there's a link to a full chord diagram for it that'll show each note as well as a tab. So let's look at the Ionian scale with the root note in A. As you can see, the Ionian mode has a very happy, sort of bright feel to it. There aren't a whole lot of metal songs that I'm aware of that really focus on this mode because it's so uplifting, but it's an important thing to learn because most modern music theory is derived from it. So once again, that scale all the way up, full octaves, 2 octaves and back is. So let's take a look at the actual diagram for the Ionian mode. On the left-hand part of the screen, you can see a picture of the fretboard as if you're looking at it dead on. The headstock would be up top above the drawing, and the pickups and the bridge would be down below. The X's represent the root notes, which are the A's, and the other circular marks represent the other notes you can hit on the way up there. Now, this can be shifted anywhere all over the neck. If you put those X's, the top ones on the left, on the 5th fret, it becomes A Ionian or A major. If you shift that up to the 8th fret, it becomes C major. If you shift it up to the 12th, it becomes E major. You can put this anywhere on the fretboard, and as long as that X is on your root note, you know you're going to be playing the correct notes. Now let's look over at the right portion where the tab is. Since we've done this in A, I just set this out as a single string riff on the A string. And you're going to play an open string, then the 2nd fret, 4th fret, 5th fret, 7th, 9th, 11th, and then when you hit the 12th, that's the next octave of A, and you've completed the scale. If you look up top, there are Roman numerals 1 through 7, and then a 1 at the end. Roman numerals are a good way to refer to the actual parts of the scale. For example, the 1s are going to be the root note, the 2 is the 2nd note in the scale, the 3 is the 3rd note, and so on and so forth. Now, it's not very interesting to look at for Ionian here, but once we start looking at the other derivative modes of the major scale, you're going to see how there's some differences. Below, there's a bunch of W's and a few H's. That represents the the tonal distance between each note. The W's represent whole tones, which is the equivalent of 2 frets, and the H's represent half tones, which is the equivalent of 1 fret. So for example, from 0 to 2, that's 2 frets, which is a whole tone, so there's a W there, another W for the next whole tone. This pattern here, this whole, whole, half, is kind of important to remember, because that'll let you know that no matter where you are on the fretboard, if you end up somewhere funky that you don't remember real well, as long as you can find the root note and you remember that whole, whole, half, you can pretty much build the scale right on the spot where you're at. The second mode of the major scale is Dorian. Now we're going to keep the same root note of A, and this is what the Dorian scale sounds like. It has a slightly darker sound than Ionian, but not as dark as some of the scales we're going to go across. Now once again, I'm not going to talk about which frets I'm doing time at a time. You can look at the diagrams underneath the video for that. But once again, Dorian, all the way up 2 octaves and back, sounds like this. Let's take a look at the diagram and the tab for Dorian here. On the left, you're going to see the diagram looking direct on the fretboard, and once again, wherever you place those X's, you're going to be playing in Dorian of that key. So for example, if you put the X on the 3rd fret of the low E string, then it's going to be G Dorian. 5th fret, it's going to be A Dorian, so on and so forth. Now let's look over at the tab portion. Obviously, it's a little different than the Ionian scale. The Roman numerals up top are going to refer to the distance between these notes and the original Ionian notes. For example, the first note, the 0, is the same, the second note is the same, but the third note, that 3 on the A string, that's going to be flat from where it would be if it was the major scale. So example, on the major scale it will go 0, 2, 4, but in here it's 0, 2, 3. Continues on up, and there's also a flat 7th note. So when you talk about Dorian, you can talk about it in terms of how it's a major scale, it's the Ionian scale, but instead of a normal Ionian scale, it's Ionian with a flat 3rd and a flat 7th. All these other notes are exactly the same as they are on the Ionian scale. And once again at the bottom, we've got the distances between all the notes. And now it's whole, half, whole, half, whole. Now I know this probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and it's probably stupid that I'm talking about it, but at the end we're going to tie it all together and you're going to go, oh yeah, and it's going to make a whole lot more sense, so just bear with me for the time being. Let's move on to the third mode, which is Phrygian. Alright, we're keeping it in the key of A, right here on the 5th fret, and this is Phrygian, 1 octave. Phrygian has a much darker sound than Ionian, but it's still very musical. You're going to find a lot of your more Spanish and flamenco style riffs coming from this scale, and that usually is the emphasis between the root note and the first step up from the root note, which is a flat 2nd. A lot of riffs like so Phrygian, full 2 octave run up and down, sounds like this. Taking a look at the Phrygian diagram here, you're going to see it's very different from Ionian. The notes up top, if you look at the Roman numerals here, it's got a lot of variations from the Ionian scale. It's got a flat 2nd, a flat 3rd, a flat 6th, and a flat 7th. A big emphasis of the scale, like I said, is that root note to the half tone above it, that 0, 1 there, which really makes it stand out from the Ionian scale, which doesn't have that. Looking at the intervals below, it starts out with a half interval, then a whole, a whole, a whole, a half, a whole, and another whole. So let's move on to the fourth mode, which is Lydian. All right, so keeping in the key of A, here is the Lydian scale. Now you might notice that this is almost identical to the original Ionian mode, except there's one major difference. That fourth note stands out pretty drastically, especially if you accent it by playing it against the root note. That changes the feel of the mode pretty drastically depending on how much you emphasize it. That note, which is the sharp fourth or the flat fifth, depending on how you look at it, is referred to as a tritone. This is something that you've probably heard about if you've studied any sort of music history that was, supposedly outlawed by the church back in the Middle Ages and Dark Ages because it sounded too evil. Obviously, as a result of this, it's something that's emphasized in a lot of metal songs. In fact, if you take the original Black Sabbath song, Black Sabbath, it starts out in the key of G with it's emphasizing that tritone note right there. And of the modes, the 7 modes based on the major scale, Lydian is the first one we encounter that has that. So once again, Lydian with a full 2-octave run sounds like this. Taking a look at the diagram for Lydian here, you're going to see exactly what I was just talking about. That it's essentially the Ionian mode except for that one major difference, which is that half-raised 4th degree, which instead of being the 5th fret there is going to be the 6th fret if you look at it on a single string. If you're playing Lydian and you really want to emphasize the difference between Lydian and Ionian, focus on that note, and it'll really make it stand out as being different. So let's move on to the 5th mode, which is Mixolydian. Okay, we're staying in the key of A, and here is Mixolydian 1 octave. Mixolydian is another mode that's very similar to Ionian, and there's one difference, which is that the 7th degree, instead of being here, is here. So it has a bit more of a minor feel to it with that, that flat 7th degree. Instead of, your standard Ionian, Mixolydian is. And once again, if you emphasize that, it's going to make it stand out from the Ionian mode. So here is a full 2-octave run of the Mixolydian mode. As you can see, the Mixolydian mode, like I said, is very similar to Ionian with one major difference. You've got that flat 7th scale degree instead of the normal natural 7th scale degree, and that's going to color the flavor of it a bit, give it a different sort of feel, a little bit darker than normal Ionian. Looking at the intervals underneath, it's whole, whole, half, whole, whole, half, whole. So let's move on to one of my personal favorites of the 7 modes, aeolian, the 6th mode. We're going to stay in the key of A, and here's 1 octave of aeolian. Aeolian is one of my favorites because it manages to sound dark, it can sound epic, it can sound depressing depending on how you emphasize it, but I personally feel it has a lot more emotional content than Ionian, which just seems kind of stupidly happy to me a lot of the time. Mind you, since I spent most of my time playing an aeolian, I've found some ways to work with it and do different things with it, and I'd probably find just as much range if I focused on Ionian, but such is life. Another reason I really like aeolian is that a lot of really classic rock riffs are based on this scale. For example, the song Crazy Train down here in F-sharp aeolian is that same scale. I could go on forever about all the awesome riffs in aeolian, but instead of wasting your time, let's just look at a 2-octave run of the aeolian scale, once again in A. The diagram for aeolian here shows that it has some pretty noticeable differences from the original Ionian scale. Your 3rd degree is going to be flat, your 6th degree is flat, and your 7th degree is flat. Now if you emphasize that flat 6, flat 7, 1 chord progression, for example, and let's do it in A, but you've probably heard that 1,000,000,001 times in a bunch of popular songs. That occurs in a few other modes on here, but aeolian really brings it out. It can sound really epic and really powerful, and that's something I really like about it. So once again, it's got a flat 3rd, a flat 6th, and a flat 7th. And if you look at the intervals underneath, it's a whole interval, a half interval, a whole, a half, and then 2 more whole intervals back to the root note. Now, before we tie them all together, we got one more we should look at, and that's going to be the 7th mode, and in my opinion, the darkest, ugliest, most metal mode, and that mode is Locrian. Staying in the key of A, here's 1 octave of Locrian. So here's what I like about Locrian. Not only does it have that tritone devil's note dark interval, the flat 5th, it also has the flat 3rd from some of the other modes, which you can emphasize to have kind of a bluesy sound. It has the flat 7th, which also emphasizes that bluesy sound, which I just showed, but it also has the flat 2nd from Phrygian, which can give it that kind of Spanish sound or that metal sound. It's got all of that. It can sound really discordant depending on how you emphasize it. It can sound really awesome depending on how you emphasize it, but if you look at a lot of really well-known metal songs, you're going to see a lot of that, especially that first interval, that half interval from the root note to the flat 2nd degree. There you go. Now a full 2-octave run of Locrian sounds like this. When you look at the diagram and the scale intervals and the Roman numerals up top for the Locrian mode, you're going to see that it's about as different from Ionian as you could possibly have it be. The 1st scale degree and the 4th scale degree are still the same, but the 2nd degree is flat, the 3rd degree is flat, the 5th degree is flat, the 6th degree is flat, and the 7th degree is flat. There's a lot of variation. It sounds almost nothing like it, especially if you emphasize those weirdnesses and those differences. Looking at the intervals at the bottom, it starts out with a half interval, then it does a whole interval, a half interval, and then 3 more whole intervals before it reaches the root note again at the upper octave. So now that we've talked about all the 7 individual modes, let's take a look at why they are what they are and how they connect together and some of the broader ideas behind this. Before we go into that, I would like to mention that even though we're going to talk about how it all ties together, it's very important to develop a pretty intimate and pretty unique understanding of each mode. Practice them all individually, not thinking about the other ones, and then practice them with the mindset of how they relate to each other. Because each one has a lot of cool little things that you can do with it, a lot of different feels and emotions you can evoke in your music through emphasizing those differences in the scale degrees there, and each one really deserves its own treatment. So let's start talking about how they all lock together. This diagram here is going to show you the 7 modes of the major scale in terms of the intervals between the notes in the scale. Now on the left I've labeled all 7, Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, and Locrian. And up top I've listed scale degrees 1 through 7 and then back to the root note, which is the 1 again. Now if you look at the Ionian scale, it's WWH, WWWH. Now look at the Dorian scale underneath it. And you might notice it on your own, but if not, I'm going to point it out. If you start on the 2nd degree of the Ionian scale, that is the same interval as the 1st degree of the Dorian scale. And if you start on the 2nd degree of the Dorian scale, that's the same as the 1st degree of the Phrygian scale. The whole pattern just shifts to the left for every mode you move up. So, for example, if you start on the 6th of the Ionian scale and just go from there with that whole, half, whole, half, whole, it's going to build out the aeolian mode. This is why they talk about all of these modes being derived from the major scale. That major scale, Ionian, is the same as all of the other scales. It just depends on what part you start at and which part you emphasize as the root note. If you emphasize the 3rd note of the Ionian scale, it becomes Phrygian, as long as that's the tonal center. If you emphasize the 7th note of Ionian, it becomes Locrian. They all are the same scale. It's the same set of intervals, just emphasizing different parts of it as the root note. Now let's take a look at this in another way. So you'll have to excuse my crappy diagram here, but I think it kind of illustrates the point. If you take a look at this circle here, you'll see that Ionian's up top, and then it moves in a clockwise fashion to Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, and Locrian. I've labeled the intervals between each mode there. So that same pattern, that whole, half, whole, half, applies to every mode, just depending on where you start with it. If you start on the 2nd, it's Dorian. If you start on the 4th, it's Lydian. If you start on the 5th, it's Mixolydian. It's all the same scale. In case I haven't driven this point home enough, here's an entire 22-fret picture of a standard 6-string guitar neck. Now, if you start looking at the 5th fret there, you're going to see your standard Ionian box, which is, the 1st mode. If you move up to the 2nd degree of that mode on the 7th fret, you'll recognize that as the Dorian pattern. Move up to the 9th and you'll recognize it as the Phrygian pattern. Move up to the 10th, you'll see it's Lydian. Move up to the 12th, there's the Mixolydian box. Move up to the 14th, there's the Aeolian box. Move up to the 16th, there's the Locrian box. And if you move up to the 17th, you'll see that's the Ionian box once again. It's all derived from the same intervals there. That whole, half, whole, half. That is what makes this the major scale. And once again, it's just which parts you emphasize. This diagram here shows it all in terms of a Ionian. But if you emphasize the different notes, you're going to be able to bring out those different modes. And that depends not only on what you're doing with your lead playing, but what the backing instruments are doing, what they set up the tonal center of the song to be. So I hope this helps. I hope you have a pretty basic grasp of how these things fit together, how they work, and why they work the way they do. And the knowledge is just the first part. You really need to practice all of these. You need to get them down, so if I say D Mixolydian go, you can bust out that box pattern, and also you can know that you can play it at different parts on the fretboard and keep it Mixolydian or make it different modes depending on how you want to emphasize it. They're all very cool in their own way. You can do a lot of cool stuff with each mode depending on how you emphasize it and what notes you tend to accent. But It's all the same thing. So once you learn it, you pretty much know it. You just need to mess around with it a bit. If there's any other stuff you guys want to know about, any other guitar stuff, any other recording stuff, I'm always open to suggestions, and we can do as many of these videos as you guys need. In the meantime, I'd ask that you check out some of my music. You can hear my video game covers at www.vikingguitar.com and my original thrash death metal stuff at www.ieofi.com. That's EYEOFI, eye.com. Once again, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it, and keep the world metal.